I'm so excited to be here. My name is Vicenti, and I'm here to talk about headless content systems with React Native. And I've been super lucky in my career to work on a number of awesome open source projects, from the development process to the open sourcing, including React Native, React Navigation, and Docusaurus. But in recent years, I've been thinking more broadly about how we as a community build apps. So who are we? Like, this is us. We're like gremlin developers with laptops. It's really, really cool. And what do we actually maintain, though, as a team? We maintain a code base, which goes through a platform-specific process to build and deploy our application. And we also maintain a database for our users, which is tightly integrated into our application. And what do I mean, though, when I say us as a team? Actually, I'm not just talking about the developer here. I'm talking about how clients and executives and creatives like marketing people and designers are all wanting to have control over the application that we are expected to build and deliver. So as developers, though, we're the only ones who know how to push and deploy the application, right? So in practice, it often looks like this, where the creatives and the executives have to go through the developers to make changes in the application. And this is not really a desirable process for anyone involved. This can be exhausting, and everyone would rather that the engineering team could focus on delivering new features for our users. So that's why I think we should introduce a new thing here in between our two things that we're maintaining. I think we should have a content management system. Now, a CMS allows us to basically address this problem here where the non-technical people have to go through the engineers, and instead it allows the non-technical people to go through a dashboard that's able to directly make changes in our application. So that's why I want to talk about content management systems today, is because it's a big problem in our organization, and it really weighs down the engineering team by having to go through this workflow. So content management systems, though, are not new. I'm sure you're aware of this, right? They come from a world of the web, where the content management system database and dashboard are tightly integrated into your application. They actually provide the application itself, the application that the user sees, right? Like you probably know of WordPress, this incredibly popular monolithic content management system. But there are some troubles when we have the content management system like this, right? Like, I'm talking to a very technical audience. I'm sure you're all aware of computer history like I am. Like, years after Al Gore invented the internet, Tim Apple invented the App Store, right? So the problem is that a content management system here is not able to very easily send data to the applications that are in the App Store because they're tightly integrated with the web experience. And that's not the only problem, because you've got technical people like engineers who really struggle to own the application that they're expected to work on because it's so tightly integrated and the developers can't choose their own tools when it comes to building the actual application. So that's why in recent years, headless content management systems have become more of a thing. And I think headless content management systems are great, but I just want to quickly acknowledge that the application that you're developing is the head that we've just removed. Like, okay, whatever. But the headless CMSs solve problems, right? Because they're a standalone dashboard and database for your content, they allow you to deploy they allow you to deliver content to applications, and of course, developers are able to use their normal build and deploy process to deliver their application. Now, there are a lot of content management systems out there, but surprise, surprise, I'm working on a content management system called the Zerv content system. And before we get too far into the fun stuff, I just want to show you what it's like to have a very simple headless content system. So, ready for a quick demo. So I'm going to come into the dashboard and create a store, which is called demo. And I'll create an entry, which is going to be some text that's showing up on our website called headline, right? And headline, we can choose various different JSON data types here. And I'll say that this is a text. I'm going to save the schema, and we're going to come in, actually create our headline. Okay? So we've created some very simple data in our application, and of course we can access this data over an API. So here's the URL basically for the store, and I'm going to drill into this headline URL, and we see the value for it, but we can also go and query for the schema. So this is querying for the actual raw JSON schema of our data. Okay, pretty simple. Let's see if we can crank it up a notch, because our marketing team wants to manage content that's on our website and in our application, like a list of frequently asked questions. And these are the data types that we have available, but it's more powerful if we create a reusable schema for our store here. So I'll say that we're creating a question response, which is, a question and an answer. So this is an object because, question and answer are named things inside of it. So I'll go ahead and add the entry for question, set this to be text, and I'm going to do the same thing for the response. So really simple, we're creating an object for our FAQ, basically. Now we can go back once we save the schema. Let's go ahead and add an entry for the FAQ. So I'm going to pretend to be the marketing person now, right? So let's say that this is FAQ is, we could put this as a question response, but it's actually a list of question responses. So for items, I'll say that the items are question response items. And this is the schema for our entry. So now I get to play marketing person and come in and add some questions like, what is Zerv useful for? That might be a common question. Here's a response. You'll see this again later. How can I show my support for Zerv? Right, here's another question. So now that we've saved this, we can go ahead and query for this data, of course, from the back end, right? This is all available through a JSON API. Okay, so that's pretty fun. This is what it's like when you have a very basic content management system. This is, at least it works, but the problem here is our application, it's able to, of course, query from an API, right? We're all developers, we're all familiar with how to query application data. Unfortunately, when we query data from this API, our application does not know what type it is. So there's a type safety issue where it's basically just getting arbitrary JSON that we need to program against. So how are we going to program against this thing where we're just getting this back as basically any data or unknown data? Well, because we have an API that allows us to query for the schema in the application, we can actually run a command line program that will code gen a client for us that's a type-safe client that understands the data that our application will get from our database. So this is where it gets a little bit more fun. I'm going to jump into a demo where we'll see what it's actually like to use the Zerv CMS in a friendly way that gives us a type-safe interface to it. So here's a simple Next.js application, right? It's our frequently asked questions. And it's showing, this is the content, basically. And here it is, it's hard-coded, right? So how easy is it to deploy this content? Well, you need to know how to use React, and you need to be able to refresh, or you need to be able to deploy your application. But we want it to be the data from our CMS. So let's go ahead and start by installing the Zerv CLI. And we're going to install all of our dependencies here. We're going to get the Zerv CLI, and while we're at it, we're also going to get the Zerv client, which is going to be the runtime client. And the runtime client is a very thin library. So we're also going to go and install React Query, which is powering the client right now. So that's a pure dependency that you need to install into the application as well. And once we've installed these dependencies, we can jump into our package.json, and then we're going to configure it with a little bit of configuration. So what does this configuration look like? Basically, the Zerv field has a dynamic sync, which means that this is content that's going to be synced to your client. And the demo store is what we're calling it in our code base. So this is a local name that's going to be basically the name of our client. And then here's the URL of the store. Specifically, you can see it's got the username and the store name in there. And then when you run Zerv sync, it creates the client for you, right? Pretty fun and straightforward stuff. But I'm going to go ahead and add this as a prepare script. So that way, whenever I run yarn in my code base, it's automatically going to run Zerv sync. Okay, so now we can go ahead and sync it. Here we go. It quickly grabs it from the store. And you can see it's listed some files that it's gone and created for us. So what do these files look like? Specifically, the index file has the type safety and has all of the interesting stuff going on in it. So here is the schema for what the question response is. And if you look down, you can also see what the file schema is, which is a list of question responses. Okay, pretty fun. Now we have like a type-safe interface in our application. Before we can use it, though, we do have to set up React Query. So that basically means having a query client provider in our application. And now that we have this React Query sort of environment installed, we're ready for the fun part. We can use FAQ, which is coming from our custom store. And here we're just using the React Query API. We get data, we get is loading, we're able to iterate over our data and punch in the data that's coming from the store, which is the question and the response. And then we also have the $ key, which is a built-in key that's being used to deduplicate, tell React the order of everything in your store. And we also need to add error handling here. I'm sure you've noticed. Don't worry. I know that we need to add error handling. Use FAQ, though, is just using React Query out of the box. So you can actually pass in everything that you would pass into a React Query the query options into use FAQ, or you could get the error out of the same object that it returns. Okay, so pretty fun. Now we're able to go ahead and load our data from the CMS. Pretty fun. And obviously what's important here is that we're getting it back in a way that's type safe and is going to be a little more robust for us than just a normal JSON API. So that's fun. We're still just talking about a headless content management system. And the reason why I consider this headless, right, is because you had to write all of the code yourself. You had to anticipate everything that was going to come from the CMS and present it manually in the application, right? So this could still be a little bit exhausting. Now, how can we come back and re-head this CMS? Like, I want to provide some value here so that you don't have to anticipate everything that your content people are going to want to put into the application. So how about we just show you what that's like? Because we already have this example with FAQ. So what happens in the FAQ when the content person comes in? Of course, they've been setting it up in the content management system, and now they want to change this text in a way that you didn't anticipate, right? Maybe they ask for a really simple request, like this is text that's being displayed to humans. Like, why can't they just make some of it bold? Or why can't they have an inline link in this text? I mean, the problem, I guess, is that this is not text for humans. This is like an actual string, right? If we look at our code, this is only ever a string. Like, wouldn't it be nice if this were not an actual literal text, but a human text? So I'm going to go into the store settings and turn on a schema that's an experimental schema called human text. And from here, I'm going to reset a little bit of my data. I'm going to wipe out this entry. And more importantly, let's go into the schema for the question response and say that the response here is an actual human text. Ooh, what's that going to look like? All right, so we're going to save this, go back into our entry, and again, I get to play content person. I get to play marketing person and say, all right, what are we going to do as a marketing person? Well, here it is, we're setting up some data. We're saying, we could put a human text as this field, but again, it's a list. And it's a list of these question response schemas that we've created. So, of course, the marketing team is at it again. They're trying to figure out what to put in here. And we're going to put in the same content, but we're going to emphasize it. And you can see that there's an actual, not rich text editor. I wouldn't call it rich text. I would call it a human text editor. The developer will still control most of the aesthetics here, but the content is defined by the content person. So here the content person is making certain stuff bold. I don't know. They're not very creative here. Okay, so, and of course, the main reason is they wanted to be able to embed links inside of this content, right? Like they just want links. Is it so much to ask? They just wanted links. But you said it's a string. You were explaining that it's not text for humans. It was text for computers. But finally, we have a human text. We can go ahead and add some links. Okay, so again, this is still entirely headless workflow so far. I'm going to rerun Zerv sync, and it's going to copy the new schema into the application. And this is what the schema looks like. The question response is now referring to this built-in schema type. Now, before we can actually render this to our users, unless the developer wants to go and do it manually again, we can go ahead and install Yarn, install React Native content from Zerv. Okay, here we go. Once we have this, we can replace this text. You can see it had a type error because it was a string, and it's now no longer a string. So let's go ahead and punch in a real thing it's going to check out with a type safety perspective as soon as we import it properly from Zerv React Native Content / human text. Okay, so this is pretty exciting. I know earlier I was showing that this is a Next app, and I just realized that we're at a React Native conference. Wouldn't it be nice if I were demoing this in React Native? But actually, let me scroll down here. It turns out, yeah, this is actually a React Native app. So let me just run it with Next, or with Expo, of course. Here it is running on iPhone, and I haven't forgotten your favorite operating system, Android. Let's go ahead and run it on Android as well. As you can see, it loads up the human text. There's certain amounts of text in there that's bold, and there were some links. This is also very highly customizable. The links are working, it seems. That's nice. I don't know if those links look nice to me. So this human text is an actual React Native text component that you can customize like any other text component. So the developer still has a lot of control here, and basically all the behavior of human text is totally controllable by the developer, and in fact, you don't even have to render the human text component if you want to manage that stuff yourself. So anyways, now the developer can enjoy content that they didn't have to anticipate ahead of time. So this has been a quick, fun demo. That's it for the demos of the reheaded content system. So I'm pretty excited about this. I think this has been pretty fun. So this is a quick look at what it's like when you rehead the content system. And we're keeping things pretty simple right now. This is very basic. So for now, this is just a human text. But eventually, we can build higher level components like page. And a page might include images and blog post like content. And there would be associated views inside of the Zerv dashboard as well as schemas for those things. So don't get too excited yet, though, because I've only shown you Zerv on a web app. And I'd love to show you on a mobile app, but it's not quite ready. But I am working on building a version of Zerv for the app stores. And I think this is super important. And it's not like I would say that your marketing people and your executives, like they're just always on their phone. Like I would never say that. I would never say that. But seriously though, this is for developers because this is something that developers need. You need access to the content in your applications, right? Maybe you're using this for a feature flag and you've been working all week on building this new feature for your application. And on Friday night, you're out drinking hours after shipping it to production. And for some reason, your phone starts blowing up, and apparently all the users are experiencing a broken experience. And, are you going to go run home to your laptop while you're half drunk trying to fix that? Or are you just going to pull out the application on here because you're a smart developer, you anticipated this might happen, so you put all of this behind a feature flag on the Zerv content system, and you can turn this feature right off. And then probably the next round of drinks are on you, okay? So this is Zerv. I'm really excited about it. I hope you're not excited about it just because you've seen some cool demos and there's the promise of a mobile app. I think we should think of these things in a broader sense. Why is this thing going to be relevant years from now and not just some cool thing that's on stage right now? So to get the elephant out of the room, I want to mention that Zerv is on GitHub. Now, I think this is really exciting, but you shouldn't be excited just because it's on GitHub, because a lot of things are actually on GitHub that aren't really that open source. So how are we going to put this on GitHub? How is this going to be published, right? Maybe it's going to be a source available project? Maybe? No? Do you consider this a SUS available project? Anyways, a lot of projects that are content management systems will publish their clients on GitHub as open source, right? Should Zerv entirely be open source or just the client? And there's a bunch of other ways that people will publish open source that make me a little bit uncomfortable about them in the long term. So there's a lot of open core projects. And open core is pretty financially sustainable, and yet the open source project has a limited growth because there's all sorts of proprietary pieces of ecosystem that constrain it. And also, I'm not very spiritually aligned with a copyleft license, because copyleft projects they force you to open source them if you make changes to them. And I want you to be able to fork this thing and entirely have control over it, do whatever you want with it, turn it into your own product. So I'm really excited to say that Zurv is properly open sourced. Ooh, so what does that mean? I mean that it's open sourced under a permissive license. And to be specific, I mean it's open sourced under Apache 2, which is a lot like the MIT license. It's kind of like if the MIT license were written by lawyers instead of being written by students. I don't know. So that's why I think the Zurv content system is super exciting. And I think that, like, for you to get an understanding of it, I mean that Zurv is basically my life. Like, my identity right now is basically digital nomad and creator of Zurv. Like, that's it for me right now. But sadly, I can't work on Zurv forever because eventually I'm gonna die. I hope you don't find that funny, by the way. All right? I don't find that funny at all. But more urgently than that, actually, I'm gonna run out of money. Like, I need to figure out how I can make this sustainable. So I'm looking for business models and I'm looking for investors who can help sustain Zurv as an open source business. So what's the first business model that I'm gonna go for, right? I'm gonna offer Zurv as a paid hosted service. So because self-hosting, of course, is possible, it might not be easy, and a lot of people just don't want to self-host the service. So I'm going to offer a paid hosted service. And I think this is a really good business model up until a certain point of growth when some service like Amazon Web Services comes in like a bully and literally tries to take my lunch money. But if that happens, it means that Zurv has been highly successful and we can move on to other business models. So Zurv will be a paid hosted service, but, well, I haven't built a billing system yet, but more importantly than that, I really want to get it into people's hands as easily as possible and let you all try it. So this is appropriate now for you to try on your side projects, and I'd love for you to give me feedback. It has some rough edges. I would not say it's ready for production business use. And I'm going to leave it running as a free service for at least the next 6 months up until around April of next year. And I'll give you 2 months of notice before I shut it down, and at that time you can always download it and self-host. So it comes with no guarantees, but if you do want some priority support and private infrastructure, get in touch with me and maybe I can put you on a paid plan a little bit earlier. So the alpha is live today, and I'd love to hear what you think. And before I wrap up, I want to talk a little bit about where Zurv is headed. So we've talked about how Zurv fits into your team's workflow, right? It's a new content management system. Maybe you have other content management systems, but Zurv is hyper-focused on being just a content management system for simple JSON and text. And I really want to emphasize that I'm focusing on making that an excellent experience before moving on to other things. But I also can't wait to add fun support like multimedia, images and videos, and low-code features for your non-technical people to add features to your application in a way that integrates well with your actual code. So I think it's going to get a little bit bigger. And also, the thing is users have content too, and I'd love to support things like authentication and like real-time database updates as well. And I'm not thinking about any of this stuff in a silo. I'm trying to think about your entire experience of building an application, so ultimately there's going to be a lot of growth from here. And again, I'm not thinking about just the developers either, I'm thinking about the non-technical people as well on your team. So this is a little bit about like where I think Zurv can go from here. And that is why I think you should be excited about Zurv, because I've given you a broader picture of the project, not just some fun demos, which I think are incredible, but I'm really, really dedicated to this project. So you're welcome to try the free alpha. I'd love to have your feedback, and I would also love to have any contributions if you're interested in contributing in any way. So if you can check out the documentation in the alpha, you can do that at zurv.app. If you want to show your support, I'd love to see your star the project on GitHub, follow along on Twitter, and yeah, that's it. I want to give a really deep thanks to all of you for being a part of this really incredible community. And thank you so much, React Native, and thank you, CallStack, for hosting us.